Hello guys, so before we go to model our character, I want us to make a base for the character. So if you think about the character being, with two legs, like a humanoid, two legs, two arms, the only way you're going to, and a body, the only way you're going to get that character to sort of stand up properly is by making absolutely massive feet. But, you might not want to do that. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a circular base. So to do that, I'm going to put this up here, and I'm going to create a cylinder. Now, a cylinder comes up here, but what we're going to do is we're going to edit the size of that cylinder in this dimensions panel here. Okay, and because we want to make sure that the size of our object is, within the size of the 3D printer. So we want to give ourselves a good amount of space to model in. So I'm going to go for 50 millimeters by 50 millimeters on the XY vertices. Here. And then the thickness, I think we're going to go for, let's go for 5 millimeters. So as you can see here, we have a nice base to play with, and we've made sure that the dimensions of that base are, in the correct dimensions. So next up, what we're going to do is we're going to start the modeling process. For my character, I've decided that I'm going to start by modeling this skirt here, because actually, if I can get the shape of the skirt here, let me just turn it off. If I can get this shape here, it's actually a common shape in this character, so I can actually start to replicate that shape for the sleeves and for the hair to give us quite a nice looking kind of consistency through the character. So to do that, I'm going to show you a number of ways to do it. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go into my x-axis viewpoint, and you can see here that I have my square. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to start to change the size of my cube so that it is roughly in shape of my dress. Okay. Now, depending on who you talk to, if this was a very technical character, then the drawings would be a lot more accurate. They'd probably be kind of mirror image. They'd have a kind of mirror image. They'd have some they'd be very symmetrical down the middle. I like to use character sheets as references, so they don't have to be so accurate. But really, it depends on who you're working for. I think that's quite an important point. Depending on what your client wants, or depending, if you're working in a studio and they want, character sheets done in a particular way, you should do that. So now that I've got the kind of rough size of my dress, I'm going to go to edit mode. I'm going to start to create what are called loop cuts. So if you remember in the video before, we can break down our objects and look at them as vertices. Then you have edges, which are the line between the two vertices, and then you have faces. Okay, so what a loop cut does is it creates edges all the way around an object. Because at the moment, because it's a cube, there's a limited amount of edges, so it means that if we were to kind of move anything, we don't really have any choice of movement or ways to move our cube into the sort of shape or the rough shape of our dress. So we need to create these loop cuts. Okay, so you'll notice if you click loop cut, you need to be in edit mode. You need to go down the toolbar on your left hand side, And you'll see that you, after the kind of sort of universal move, rotate, scale, underneath in edit mode, you've got some options like extruding region, insert faces, beveling, loop cut, knife. So we want to click on loop cut, and I'm going to create a few loop cuts here to give me more kind of choice. I'm going to make sure my loop cut is horizontal, because I don't need to do any more loop cuts vertically yet. So here I've created 3 horizontal loop cuts here. I might actually do a few more, because the more you put in, the more information you have to work with. Okay, so you'll see now that the cube we've created some more edges around there. Okay, so what I want to do now is I'm going to go into my scale tool. I'm going to select at the top by holding down Shift. I'm going to select all of the edges at the top. I'm going to go into my X viewpoint, and I'm going to scale down here to where will be the sort of top of this part of the garment. Another important thing to do is to keep looking at your object in both front, full front, and then side front. Sorry, that doesn't make any sense. Your reference image, that is a front on and a side on. Sorry. So another thing that is useful when you're using edges is to hold down the Option key on a Mac, and so that when you click an edge, you'll see that it is highlighted all the edges around the object. So it makes things a little bit easier, so that when you want to come to start to form your garment, you don't have to kind of go in and then hold down, the select button, the Shift button, and click every individual edge. So I'm going to do this now to try and create the general shape of the dress. So one thing to be aware of in Blender, and same as Maya, is every time you create sort of a new loop cut, you're creating more faces. With more faces, you're creating more information, which makes your model bigger, which can sometimes, depending on how large it is, create problems with your computer and the running of your computer, as we'll talk about a bit later on. So here we are, just kind of roughly trying to get that shape. Let's have a look at it from the side. Okay, try and give it some shape on the side as well. You can see here that it's not symmetrical, and this is out a bit further here, but we're just going to work with that because, as I said, it's not particularly accurate. But I kind of want to, when I'm modeling, if I want to change direction for my character, or I want to add something new because I feel like it would be a nice touch to it, I don't have to follow so rigidly my reference images because they're more of a reference. Some of you might prefer to be really specific and really precise when you do this. I leave that up to you. So here we have kind of a relatively kind of accurate representation of that element of the dress. Now, as it stands, it's not a particularly rounded object. So what we're going to introduce you to now is a thing called modifiers. because at the moment we don't have a lot of faces, and we're really just sort of creating loop cuts, creating new faces and moving those elements around. But what we want to try and do is create a kind of more rounded shape. So I'm going to show you modifiers. So to modify something, go into object mode, make sure your object is selected, and modifiers. To get a modifier, you want to go to the right hand side, and there is a vertical sort of section here, and the icon looks like a wrench or a tool. So you click on that, and I want you to add a modifier, and in generate we're going to do this thing called subdivision surface. So it's essentially going to split this object up, and you should kind of start to see a slightly more organic object. So already, see, it's created kind of more faces. It's essentially subdivided all the faces, and it's starting to feel a little bit more organic, a little bit more rounded, and a bit more like that garment that we're trying to create behind. Now, when it comes to modeling, you have to be a bit careful that it's not too low poly, or that the faces aren't too big, because the 3D printer is going to try and print those. So in that subdivision modifier, you have the option to kind of continue dividing, and you'll see there I can keep going until it's like really, really smooth. The more you do that, the more information you create on your model. And remember, we don't want to make it too big. So I think what I'm going to do to create consistency is I'm going to go to about 3 here. 3 feels about good. Feels good. It's like, has a nice, starting to sort of look quite smooth. So once you're happy with the shape, you can go ahead, and then in this drop down section here, you have to apply it. If you don't apply it, problems arise later on. It's like you've used the modifier, you've kind of playing around with it, and when you're happy with it, you kind of have to add that on into the model. So you have to apply before you move on. Okay, so I've applied that subdivision to this element here. Now, what I'm going to do here to save myself some time is I'm actually going to go ahead and I'm going to model this character by duplicating this object here by pressing Shift D. You can see I've duplicated this element down here, and I'm going to rotate it by pressing R. Okay, and remember, I'm in my X axis view, so it means that it's going to exist purely on the X axis. It's not going to move around, so I can feel pretty confident that you know, I'm working in the same space. Okay, I'm going to press G to kind of move that around. Again, I'm going to scale and try and start to create this object in the kind of space that I want it to be. Okay. So let's say, for the sake of speed, that you're happy with this shape here. I know it's not quite like that sleeve there. We can go and change that in a bit. But what I would want, say I'm happy with that shape and I want to replicate it on the other side. Because we're working with models, I'm going to go ahead and create another modifier. This is going to be really important when you come to model your characters. So I'm going to go to add modifier, I'm going to go to generate, and I'm going to create a thing called a mirror. Okay, so if you click on the mirror, just make sure that the y-axis is selected. Okay, because if you see the y-axis here, it's going to mirror along the y-axis. But I need to parent it to an object to mirror onto. So I'm going to go to this, like the dropper thing down here, and I'm going to click this object, the bottom half of this dress, because that is the part of the object that I want to mirror. So we have our two sleeves. Okay, so I'd like you to go ahead and do this, and then once we've done that, we have created our dress, and then I will show you in the next video a few other things in terms of, remember to apply this. And another really useful thing to do is to learn how to separate once you've mirrored. So you see, because they're mirrored, they're kind of connected, and it means that you can't work on one separate from the other. So to do that, you have to make sure they're both selected, go into edit mode, so they're both selected, then you press P. Once you press P, there you have some selections here, and you need to click by loose parts, and then if you go back to object mode, you can see that they are now separate images. But before you do that, you should go ahead and try and mold the sleeves of this so they are in a little bit more kind of in keeping with the shape language of your character. I'm going to leave you to try and figure that out, but I would have them joined together to do this bit, because any change you make to one side, for example, any change you make to one side is kind of replicated in the other side. So, and if you had them different, if you had them separated, you wouldn't create that kind of consistency, that kind of symmetry that you want when you're designing your character to begin with. So have a play with that, and in the next video we're going to look at the hair, and we're going to look at the head, and we're going to start to think about how we can join elements together. Okay, see you in the next video. Bye.